another aspect that you get is clearly that people fled to Israel during the Nazi times, and then people also fled after the Nazi times. And some of those people, I think, were deeply traumatized and turned that into the violence that they exerted. And I mean, if people watch films with some of the most horrific, revealing films of Israeli soldiers who fought at that time, and the massacres that they committed, and the anecdotes that they tell. I was watching one just last night about how severely damaged some of these people were, which was a result of what the Nazis had done to them or their families. And then, over the decades, Israel has become something else. One of the things that really shocks me now is how it's become a kind of holiday home for foreign Jews who can go there, can live there, almost to the extent of like, you live in Brooklyn, for example. You go over to Israel. A Palestinian whose family has been living in a home in East Jerusalem for generations will be removed from that home specifically so that you can have it. As what is essentially a holiday home. You maintain your US passport. 60,000 Americans in Israel. So many more from other countries as well. And then on the other hand, you have the decent Israeli people who are opposed to the Zionist violence, and you have the Torah Jews. Also a long-standing group of Jewish people who precede Zionism and the state of Israel, who are absolutely opposed to everything that the Zionist state has been doing to the Palestinians, and who are, I don't know whether you've seen any of these films, these guys are getting beaten up violently by the Israeli police on a daily basis. And when you see the films of them,
such an important point.
You've got these, the Torah Jewish people, are the guys beating them up are like twice the size of them. I mean, these police look like figures from some dystopian fascist movie made in Hollywood, suddenly transplanted into a Jewish street where they're beating up these people who look like they're from another time. I know there's a metaphorical truth in that. I think that they are from another time. They're from the time before this whole project was conceived of exterminating the Palestinians.
I think you very accurately diagnosed the situation in sort of social psychological terms, Andy, and it rings very, very true indeed. So it leads me to ask how this might eventually play out. Post Netanyahu, I mean, I think it's, some would say that what he tried to do was to distract from his own constitutional crisis and impending corruption charges, and seeing if, rather like some would say the Falklands War, it came along at a surprisingly convenient time. He seems to be toast, but what's going to follow on?
I wish I knew, Andy. I mean, you just mentioned something that's very important, which again we don't hear about in the West. Yeah. I mean, this is framed in such narrow, Manichaean terms of good, absolute good versus absolute evil. The exact reverse of how the Russia and Ukraine thing was framed as well. To be honest, he is stunningly unpopular in Israel. I think the polling shows that his unpopularity is something like 86%, that people blame him for what happened on October the 7th. And of course, before that, we had these attempts to overthrow the judiciary. He's mired in all of these financial problems. And his cabinet is, contains, I see him...
Some of whom have done time, I think, haven't they?
They have, yeah. Yes. And I mean, the alarming thing is that I was going to say that I see him more as an opportunist because there are such fanatical far-right people in his cabinet. But he's more than an opportunist. His track record is there, that he is... his intent is also fascist. But the far-right people in his government are... I suppose they're more alarming in the way because they're particularly seem to be driving the second part of this story, which we're also not hearing much about, which is that in the West Bank, settlers are now violently attacking and killing Palestinians in the second part of this story of cleansing Israel of all the Palestinians, which is to
destroy
destroy
phalangist arms.
Yeah. So I don't know whether the Israeli government collapses. This is for the Israeli people to work out, I suppose. There are clearly so many decent Jewish people in Israel, as there are so many decent Jewish people outside of Israel.
You may well be meeting some this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm sure I will be. But, who are absolutely opposed what's happening. So how we get to a situation where we can start talking about peace again, I don't know. I mean, the clearly the most important player in this at the moment, I think, is Joe Biden. And the United States absolutely has to call for a ceasefire and then start looking at ways in which some solution, a one-state or a two-state solution, but one that involves peace, that involves disarming on both sides, that involves, this will have to be policed massively by the international community. But there's no other way out of this just happening again and again and again.
I think this is what the pundit on Al Jazeera was saying, is that if you have what he called the Pax Americana, noting, of course, that Qatar and China have been quite instrumental in what went on with Israel and Saudi Arabia, this could all kick off again in 5 years and somehow be even worse.
Yeah.
As if that were possible.
Well, it's hard to imagine it being worse than this at the moment, Andy, just simply because there's no end to it. So all of the stuff that that I was talking about earlier about how there's no water, they're starving, there's no medical supplies, and the bombs just keep raining down is the first thing is to stop that, because at the moment it looks endless from Israel's part. It is that some people are saying what will satisfy them, and I looked at the figures. So in the course of the 21st century, in all of the conflicts that have taken place, which is mostly Israel every few years bombing Gaza, 6,000 Palestinians were killed. So, that's in 23 years, which has been exceeded in the last 4 weeks. And 300 Israelis were killed. That's a ratio of 20 to 1. On that basis, if we accept that 1,500 people were killed in Israel, then they would want 30,000 dead in Gaza. And I'm absolutely convinced that somebody somewhere is looking at those figures and going,
yes.
that's a proportional sense that we can get away with. But there are other people clearly pushing for it to be more than that. I mean, the voices coming out of Israel in the government and amongst pundits calling for the complete annihilation of Gaza are like, this is no joke. This is no joke. These people mean it. So until this one stops, you're right, that worse could happen even in the future. But the whole thing has to stop. The whole thing absolutely has to stop. The good news, the only good news about this is that tens of millions of people around the world, possibly hundreds of millions of people around the world, are sick, feeling sick on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, watching this happen, because you're supposed to hide genocide. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to display it in public. It's a shameful and abhorrent thing to do. It is the abject failure of humanity, and yet Israel is proud of it. It's proudly, they've cut communications in Gaza every now and then, haven't they? Which was presumably partly to try and silence the voices. But whatever their media is doing,
to stop people leaving each other, I suppose.
I mean, their media is getting their message out to the people that are on their side, and there are a shockingly large number of armchair genocide supporters. But they're losing the propaganda battle in terms of how decent people around the world are seeing this. There's no way that you can watch this happening every day.
So here's the thing, isn't it? I think sometimes people can, as it were, get blinded to the rolling news aspect of this. But the fact that you're literally seeing annihilation happen in a sort of Hunger Games way, as it were, all too literally, takes this to another level, doesn't it? Yeah,
it really does take it to another level. I don't think that we've never seen this. I had so much scrutiny of it. I mean, I was trying to think back to the start of the Iraq War, where I'm sure we remember on the first night of the Iraq War, when Baghdad was on fire because they were raining bombs down on it. But we didn't see it in close-up detail.